We are going to have the second panel of the day here. This panel brings together activists working on statewide issues of Medicare for All, public banking, and campaign finance reform to discuss and explore a broad and ambitious vision for a better California for all. We also have an education person on the panel. How can progressives throughout the state come together to form a united front, which is our mission, to transform our state, and what would that California look like? We have this panel moderated by Lauren Steiner. After a 12-year career in the cable TV industry and another 10 years as a stay-at-home mom, Lauren became a grassroots activist and organizer who fights neoliberalism, the privatization of public institutions and public goods. She was very involved with Occupy LA, started and ran Los Angeles for Bernie Sanders, and was a delegate for him at the Democratic National Convention. She fights against fracking, bad trade deals, education privatization, and for a free and open internet and community choice energy programs. She plans protests and disruptions, organizes citizen lobby meetings with legislators, speaks at conferences, writes articles and live streams protests and progressive events. She also hosts a twice-weekly live show called The Robust Opposition, many of us know about this, on her personal Facebook page. It covers local, state, and national issues, featuring interviews with activists, organizers, independent journalists, elected officials, and progressive candidates. So thank you, Lauren, and I'm handing the mic to you.
And before I get into the topic of the panel and introduce the guests, I want to talk about independent media. We know that the mainstream media, I mean, when I started in it, okay, like 40 years ago, it was bad. We were talking about concentration of ownership. Well, it's only gotten worse. And we have cities where not only are there not 2 newspapers anymore, there's not even 1 newspaper. And the newspapers that are there are part of big chains, and they're not covering City Hall, they're not covering the school board, they're not covering the Coastal Commission. They're just not covering local and state government. I mean, certain papers in California do a good job. LA Times, I have to say, has gotten a lot better since the billionaire bought it. They've been really doing a lot of good investigative work, but we really need more independent media, and that's what I'm trying to do with the Robust Opposition. I mean, in addition to doing my show where I interview activists, organizers, independent journalists, authors, progressive candidates, progressive legislators, I've had Rokana on my show, he's coming back. Kamala Jayapal wants to be on my show, Varshini Prakash, who founded the Sunrise Movement. So I get really big national guests, but I also get local activists. Gail's been on my show, David Hildebrand, Maria Estrada. In fact, I did a whole interview of Maria Estrada and a fellow Green Party candidate doing my impersonation of Rachel Maddow. What I'm trying to do is expand my show, and I'm looking for anybody here who wants to participate by being a remote correspondent to cover protests in your area. I try to get around the state. I went all the way down to the border covering a protest of a private prison detention facility in the San Diego border. I came up to San Francisco to cover the protest of Jerry Brown's Global Climate Summit. Just last week I covered the UPTE strike, the UCLA workers' strike that Bernie Sanders spoke at. And then the other day I covered the ride-share strike, Lyft and Uber drivers who are on strike. And I cover also a lot of stuff with the California Democratic Party, which is out of control. I try to cover, you know, the progressives, the blue revolution that is trying to take over that party to limit its success. So I covered the shit show, and I'll use my French. There was the LA CDP meeting a couple of weeks ago where they're trying to ram through their establishment candidate for chair. And then East Area Progressive Dem Club, where progressives in that club last week were challenging a candidate they had endorsed, Alex Villanueva, for sheriff, who has come in and has become not quite the reformer that he presented himself to be. So what I'm looking for is people that want to be like a remote correspondent. We can't depend on the corporate mainstream media to cover us. We have to make our own media. And that's been the thrust of my work since right after I graduated college. So now, transitioning to the subject of this panel, the Occupy Occupy movement really radicalized me. I've been always politically progressive, but I've never really been an activist since Occupy. And what appealed to me was not only the tactics that they took, but the overall sort of umbrella, you know, the fact that it covered so many issues. And then the same thing with the Bernie Sanders campaign. I had not really worked in a campaign before. Well, I was one of Jerry Brown's media advisors in his '92 presidential campaign when he was progressive. He was actually on this, you know, the Phil Donahue show debating with Bill Clinton. He was making the case for single-payer health care back then. And we know that he told Anthony Rendon, do not put a bill on my desk and embarrass me with having to veto that. So, but I've never been involved with the Democratic Party. The only reason I got involved with Bernie's campaign is I really saw him as not a politician, but as a public servant. And for 40 years, he's been so consistent in his message. And it's very much like if Occupy had believed in candidates and electoral politics, they would have supported Bernie Sanders. So that's why I got involved with that campaign. But I remember being at, there's an organization called Campaign for America's Future. It's one of the few progressive think tanks. The right wing has done a great job with all their right-wing think tanks, putting out all this fake news and fake science. 1 week after the Occupy Wall Street movement started, I was down there for a conference, and Van Jones was talking about Rebuild the Dream. He said that what happens is the left is very good at being in their silos. The environmentalists are here, the health people are here, the education people are here, and now we have the identity silos, you know. So I've observed that, you know, when we don't have Occupy or we don't have a Bernie Sanders candidacy, which we now do have, progressives go back into these silos. I personally believe that the most effective way to organize is based on issue campaigns, because they will persist when these candidates come and go. And I think what Matt Gonzalez said was really apt. You know, ask them if they don't care about being reelected. Because one thing I learned in Government 101 was politicians exist to get reelected. You think they exist to help pass, you know, laws that they campaigned on, but that's not really the case. So the issue activists are really very committed to the issues, but unless we get out of our silos, we're not going to get there. So I want to introduce, these are all activists that I have worked with, and I'm going to start right here with David Jette, and he is a financial analyst, a consultant, and an activist who is working to establish public banks in California. He has founded and advised dozens of enterprises in the tech, finance, and entertainment industries, both for-profit and not-for-profit, successful and unsuccessful, with a lifelong goal to promote the interests and improve the lives of working people. On his left is Cynthia Liu, and I've worked with Cynthia Liu fighting charter schools and education privatization. She attended public schools from kindergarten to the doctoral level, is a parent of a public school teen, and firmly believes that public schools are a public good. She launched the K-12 News Network in 2010 with a grant from the Ford Foundation to support diversity in digital media. She's part of the national grassroots movement to champion public schools and has presented at Netroots Nation, the Opt-Out Conference, and the Network for Public Education about helping to rid LAUSD of past Superintendent John Daisy's corruption. She is working for education justice so schools are relevant, nurturing, equitable, and liberatory spaces for all children. To her left is Michele Sutter, director and co-founder of MOVI, Money Out, Voters In. She led the successful 2014 push for the MOVI-sponsored SB 1272, the Overturned Citizens United Act, through the California legislature. The bill became Proposition 49, and she was briefly the chair of the Yes on Prop 49 campaign committee before Prop 49 was wrongfully removed by the ballot by the order of the Supreme Court of California. Finally, Prop 59, the Overturned Citizens United Act, was restored to the California ballot and passed by Californians in November of 2016. Michele chaired the Yes on 59 committee and continues to work to end corporate constitutional rights and promote civic engagement. My guest to the left has equally as long as a bio, but he gave me a really short one. And he wants to be known as a physician. This is Paul's song. And progressive activist. He used to lead the Courage campaign, and you also left out, he used to be the chair of the board of the Campaign for Healthy California, which was trying to get SB 562 passed. He's the president of PNHP, which stands for Physicians for a National Health Program. Yeah. And on the national board of PNHP. Tell us what your coalition is trying to accomplish in the state of California. How long have you been organizing for this? What bills or initiatives have you tried to pass in the past? Which ones have succeeded or failed and why? And what is next on your agenda for this coming year? And just so you know, they've all been provided with these questions in advance, so they don't have to remember the order.
I'm here with the Public Bank Los Angeles and the California Public Banking Alliance. We're working to enable cities, counties, municipalities to form public banks. We're also obviously allied in efforts to create state-level banks. In case you don't already know, a public bank, very simply, is a bank owned by a public institution, usually a public entity like a city or a state. The only one in the United States currently is the Bank of North Dakota. There's one on the way in American Samoa. But the public banking movement is growing very rapidly. There's a nice map right over there on the wall if you want to see. The red are states or areas that have looked into specific authorizing measures or feasibility studies, and obviously that big green mark there is North Dakota, our sort of shining jewel. Public banks provide a public source of capital for investment. We like to look at ourselves as the easy part of the Green New Deal to get past, because we can generate the money that creates opportunities for all the rest of the planks of a progressive agenda. And as such, we do not succeed unless the motivations that drive the need for public capital are successful. So we are nothing without climate activists, indigenous rights activists, racial justice activists, folks who are trying to improve living conditions in cities and rural areas are why public banking is moving forward. But we also provide a really great tool for activists to answer that pesky question of how you're going to pay for it. The question, of course, is usually posed disingenuously. We all know that there's plenty of money in our public coffers and in our economy to fund everything that we need to do here. However, we are bound often, at least at the political level, by laws, property rights, all of these kinds of things. So we need to take steps now, incremental and radical, whatever we can get to develop these resources. So we see our role as very as bound to the possibilities of what a bank would look like in California. I will very briefly let you know what we are doing right now, because I know we don't have too much time. In 2011, Governor Brown vetoed a bill that would have created a commission to look into a public bank in California. And he said, we don't need any more blue ribbon commissions. This was after years of work from public banking activists, long before I joined the effort. And it was before, apparently, there was any real impetus to explore that issue, despite the fact that they were only 3 years out after a complete collapse of the financial industry and the bankruptcy of Orange County and a number of consequences that had very real effects on city and state government. It was just a matter of years later, just about a year and a half ago, those same folks that made 2011 effort happen, plus new activists, got together in Colorado for an event similar to what you were talking about in 2013, organized by the Public Banking Alliance and Ellen Brown, where we got together and said, we are not going to succeed forming public banks as individual local efforts. We do not have enough leverage over state law. There are constitutional issues that need to be addressed, and as a result, we need to form a statewide alliance of public banking activists. We formed the California Public Banking Alliance shortly thereafter, and we laid out a charter that said we will define success as cities and counties and municipalities and regions being able to form public banks. The form of those banks is up for debate. There's a lot of different ways that you can form organizations like this. It's very difficult to get consensus from every locality. Different sized cities have different needs, different credit ratings. They have different priorities as far as what the social purposes of these banks are going to be. But as public banking activists, we could all agree that there were certain hurdles in the way of cities and counties that needed to be removed. We got together, we worked on model legislation, and just a couple of weeks ago, we're able to finally announce that we had joint authors, David Jette in San Francisco and Michele Santiago. We're going to put forward AB 857, which is a bill to create a framework for public banking in California. That will be in front of the Banking and Finance Committee on April 22nd. It will be in front of the Local Government Committee of the Assembly on April 24th. This bill will create guidelines for cities and counties on how to found public banks. It will remove certain statutory limits to the foundation of public capital. It'll allow counties to lend their money to these banks, and it will require these banks transparency on par with other government institutions under the Brown Act. And it'll also require these banks that they have social purposes moderated by third-party outside auditors, similar to B Corps. So these steps by themselves, in addition to requiring these banks to focus on local investment in new energy infrastructure, in affordable housing, in health infrastructure, that these banks will operate on a different metric of success than commercial banks. And decoupling the profit motive from our capital formation around public goods is an absolutely necessary step to a Green New Deal and to everything that we want to do here. So I strongly recommend that all of you contact your local representatives in California state government and tell them that you support AB 857.
I'm here representing reformcharterschools.org, and what you can do immediately is go to that website and sign the petition, and I'll tell you why. Do we have any people who walked the lines in LAUSD when they went on strike and maybe delivered donuts? Yeah, okay, all right, Oakland. Do we have any Oakland ticket boxes? All right, okay. Do we have any people in Sacramento who are getting ready to support them as they potentially go out on strike? Yeah, okay, all right, okay. Reformcharterschools.org. There has been tremendous energy coming out of the strikes north and south. They're going to keep popcorning all across the state as, because the fundamental issues of, public schools lacking complete funding is a long-standing one, dating all the way back to Prop 13, right? But there's additional issues in terms of there not being enough supports for children in the schools. Children are sick more than just one day of the week that there might be a nurse on staff. There's no social emotional supports, no psychologists, not nearly enough, etc., right? All these things. So, as a result of this momentum and this energy, the LAUSD and Oakland Unified charter lobby-backed majorities surprisingly voted for moratoriums in those school boards, in those districts, saying no more charters for 8 months, right? So about August or so. Okay, so that was a really big surprise. That is what collective action, direct action got us, right? And so we need to move that energy forward. Now, what's coming out of the legislature are 4 really important bills that reformcharterschools.org is behind. Okay, so how long have I been organizing in this coalition? Since maybe January. Yes, in this space, I've been actually to get rid of charter schools and sort of lobbyist influence there. I've been organizing since about 2016, and prior to that with K-12 News Network, blending together sort of people-powered media justice to get education justice. I've been working on that since like about 2010. So it's been a long haul, because in 2016, it was tough. Nobody was giving this space any love. Now we have some momentum. So AB 1505, 1506, 1507, 1508, that is how we're going to slow the roll of this otherwise unchecked expansion of charter schools. Why is that unchecked expansion bad? Because it's investor-driven. It's not community-driven. There's no demand. There's no grassroots demand. And basically, the business model of a charter school defunds the public district. It depopulates, defunds. Now, we need to have public funds go to public schools. And when you have privately managed but public corruption. It leads to like some, Yahoo off the street filing an application for a charter school and getting $575,000 to do what? Often to close and abandon that community, right, causing more upheaval and stress, right? So these are all things that we can do right now, and we have a very small window of time to act because these bills are fast-tracked. Governor Newsom already signed the fact that the Brown Act now applies to charter schools. They never used to have open meetings, open records.
Wow.
Yeah, that is some bullshit. Okay, now we have that, right? But this is fast-tracked, and we need to push hard because the charter school wins if they can slow walk this, if they can roll it over into a 2-year session. 2020, I guarantee you no one's going to be talking about legislation. Yeah. It's going to be the president, blah, 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 right? We have until October 13th. That's the last day that Governor Newsom can sign these bills into law. So if you go to reformcharterschools.org, sign that petition. I'm mobilizing ADEM folks. We have any ADEM folks in this crowd? Okay, we need ADEMs all across the state to go to your assembly members and start talking this up. Yeah. And then we need the DSA people. We need everybody who's on board in every possible organization, Indivisible, Swing Left, Our Revolution, whatever it is. We need to mobilize on this. And the last thing I will say is that in terms of the difficulties, I think the problem is that education often gets kind of thrown under the bus. The last thing that people think about, we shouldn't think that. If we have a really anemic public education system, we don't have folks who have the critical capacity and the understanding and the ability to kind of mobilize on all of our other issues. Climate is complicated. We need folks who can understand that and explain that to other people. How do we make sure that circulatory system is strong? We make sure that our public education is strong and kids are getting what they need. Okay? So reformcharterschools.org, start signing those petitions, start circulating that, start going to your elected people. The charter people are already, tossing their money and making threats. So get out there.
Our coalition, the Money Out Voters In Coalition, MOVI, we began organizing in 2011 in Los Angeles, and we passed a resolution through the Los Angeles City Council calling on the Congress to overturn Citizens United and its underlying precedents. As Ara mentioned in the earlier panel, money in politics is at the root of all of this and all of these issues that we all care about. We know the brick wall that they run into, and it's money and corporate constitutional rights. And so what was necessary in California was to take this call for the constitutional amendment, which is the only way that we will undo what the Supreme Court has done, and especially this Supreme Court, was to pass resolutions throughout. I think the final total was about 66 or 7 cities, at which point we thought we can go statewide and put this measure on the ballot in all of California. A lot of folks thought that was too early. It took about 6 months to find an author for that bill, even though there was so much support, but I found him in my backyard. He was my state senator, Ted Liu. And he was a passionate and effective author, and no one thought we were going to get through the legislature. I didn't even meet Ted's chief of staff until we were already all the way through the Senate and through our first assembly hearing. So they thought we were, just a nice crop of activists. We are all unpaid. It's a volunteer organization. Anyway, let me jump ahead a bit to what we're trying to do, because it's a horrible story what happened to Prop 49. Prop 59 had a better story, but still no money and not a lot of recognition. Much from what Cynthia said, it was an election year. It was 2016, and stuff was getting crazy, and nobody was focusing on us. So we were lucky to win that. But what we did with that was instruct our representatives to use all of their constitutional authority, including but not limited to an amendment, to overturn Citizens United and the underlying precedents. So I know we'll get into coalitions a bit more in a bit, but one of our primary coalition partners is a legal advocacy organization called Free Speech for People, and these are the wicked smart constitutional lawyers who have formulated ways to chip away at Citizens United. And among them is a package that's called the People's Political Reform Act that consists of two parts. Ending the ability of foreign influenced corporations to contribute money in our elections. And the other is called Ending Super PACs, which would limit Super PAC contributions to the same as PAC contributions, which is actually $5,000. So, you know, how much damage can 4 billionaires do with $20,000? So, close as we were last year to getting an author, we got the rug pulled out from under us at the end. We were very close again on an author this year, and I was finally told, much as we've been told about all of these issues, that leadership in our capital is not interested in campaign finance reform bills. We don't know about Gavin Newsom yet. So one of the things that we're trying to do is change their minds, of course. We are taking these packages locally in Los Angeles. We've got an actually awesome coalition put together under the banner that's called Unrig LA. We're working on the foreign corporate money ban. We're working on a ban of banning developers from being able to contribute to municipal elections. We've got a giant coalition for that. And we've got one bill still possibly alive in the legislature, which is the Prevention of Presidential Profiteering Act, which essentially spells out for people what the Emoluments Clause actually means and makes it law. Right. So there are things that would, if this were to pass, not only Donald Trump, but, you know, the next billionaire, and we know they're coming from all over the place. But Trump would have to divest, as would all of his immediate family, from the Trump property in Rancho Palos Verdes. And also there's a building that he owns in San Francisco, I think, yeah.
Nobody knows about it.
Okay, so I know. I didn't know about that. I found out about it. My time is up. I'll talk to you more in a bit. Thank you so much.
I want to give you just a little update about the current state of our broken and immoral healthcare system here in California. We have roughly about 2.8 million people that are currently uninsured here in the state of California, of which 250,000 are children. Insurance premiums have gone up over 200% over the last 10 years, a large part of which has been under the Affordable Care Act, while inflation has remained roughly around 20% and wages have remained stagnant. We have 1 out of 3 Californians who has insurance who will delay seeking care because they can't afford their co-pays or deductibles. We also have roughly 1 out of 8 Californians who will not fill a prescription because drug prices are too expensive. In spite of that, we have really stagnation in Sacramento and an unwillingness to really tackle the challenges at hand. What you might have heard is this legislative session, there is no single-payer bill that was introduced.
Yeah.
We did not find one legislative champion that was willing to step up to introduce a bill. Last session, we had, under the leadership and hard work of the nurses, SB 562. Which died a sort of an untimely, really awful death. But the reality of that was that even though it made it through the Senate the first time, there were some things that needed to be worked out that when Speaker Rendon put it on hold, not one legislative champion stepped up again to take it forward. And what does that tell you? That there is no political appetite. When people say things are woefully incomplete in Sacramento, it's the lack of political will that's woefully incomplete in Sacramento right now. Governor Newsom campaigned on being in favor of single payer, and he just took office in January. From what I understand, this coming week he will introduce the formation of a new single payer specific commission, which will, from what I've been told, have 7 gubernatorial appointees, 3 appointed by the Speaker and 3 appointed by the Senate Pro Tem, specifically entrusted to tackle the issues of how do we get to single payer here in the state of California. Now, it's easy to look at that with some skepticism or cynicism, but I do think at least compared to having no bill, this commission will have the teeth to then hire enough of the brightest minds to tackle how do we fund this, get it from conservative think tanks and progressive think tanks. How do we tackle things like long-term care and all of the issues that, frankly, 562 was in the process of addressing but never quite got around to. So I think that I would ask each and every one of you to put pressure on Senate Pro Tem Tony Atkins and the governor, as well as Speaker Rendon, to appoint people that are really trying to do the right thing, rather than corporate industry shills. Finally, I'm just going to say this because I know we're going to talk about a lot of other things. You are going to hear members of our own state assembly say that they're about universal coverage, and this is the big thing that progressives really need to get across. Coverage doesn't mean crap.
Exactly.
If you've got something on a piece of paper, but your copay or deductible is $6,800 a year, guess what? You're not going to go get care. And for all the people that are on Medicaid, when Medicaid has done some good, it's 1 out of 3 people here in the state of California. We rank 47th in the country in terms of physician reimbursement. Being one of the few physicians that actually takes Medicaid, I can tell you that when I see a patient and I need to refer it out to another doctor, there are very few doctors that are willing to see that patient. And that's why MALDEF has sued our state, claiming that Medicaid is separate and unequal. So when people say they want to give coverage, that means they want to keep the status quo. They're talking about issues, perhaps giving more premium support, or reducing the pre-existing threats. But all that, no one's tackling runaway costs. No one's trying to introduce insurance rate regulation or pharmaceutical drug pricing control, and single payer will absolutely do that. Finally, do not let the Republican Trump administration plan to support the Texas lawsuit against the ACA give the Democrats in our party a pass. They're saying we now need to focus on preserving the ACA. Well, I think if you went bold and you went for Medicare for all, use that as your starting point, maybe we would have had a public option now. But the thing is, we cannot give our own Democrats a pass on this.
That's right.
Finally, I'm just going to say this. I got into a lot of trouble 2.5 years ago for using a term, which I apologize for, which was quite insensitive, to talk about members of the Democratic Party who I call a corporatist. And the reality is, that's really the biggest obstacle to why we are not getting single payer here in the state of California.
And I also want to say that our presidential candidates now, even people who have co-sponsored Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill, are now walking it back. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, the millennials have an expression I see on Twitter all the time, Elizabeth Warren is canceled. She basically was on CNN last Monday night and says there's many ways to get to universal health care. You know, they're all talking about this Medicare for America Act. Kamala Harris she started out saying, yeah, we got to get rid of the private health insurance companies. She faced backlash, and the next day she walked that statement back. So Bernie's the only one, and there was an article in New York Times the other day, which in their usual way tried to make it look negative, that he was so out there that he was going to screw up the chances for people who wanted to work on an incremental basis or a practical basis. And the great quote that Bernie said in that article, they said, are you supporting this effort to, improve Obamacare, the incremental improvements? And he says incrementalism is phasing in Medicare for all. So that's what he means by incremental, not fixing Obamacare. Let's go down the line here. Talk about how working in coalition has both helped you and hurt you. David.
Like I mentioned, we were working on our own, and we were having some success with getting the city to divest from Wells Fargo for their investment in the Keystone XL and their involvement in Standing Rock. And we ran into a barrier when we had to start looking into feasibility as to how this bank could be created. These are state laws that govern banking regulation. You cannot do it on your own. We had to work with folks from other parts of the state to change state law. That's the only way it was going to happen. And of course, by saying we, it suggests that there are like independent public banking people. I focus on public banking, but most of our coalition are climate activists. They are affordable housing activists. So we are a coalition, right? Public banking as a movement is a coalition of the folks who will be funded by this effort. So there's no way around it. Maybe some of you heard about this in Los Angeles. We had an effort called Measure B. It was put on the ballot by City Council. We won 44% of the vote. We raised like 50 grand, I think, mostly from a couple of Twitter posts. That's not going to cut it, right? We are not going to be able to form a public bank in Los Angeles without public pressure and unfortunately resources, and it's through coalition building that can kind of wake people up in municipalities to stand up and make public grants.
Cynthia.
I'm working in coalition with California Educators Rising, sort of a new group that is, an offshoot of various union folks who feel like they can both work within the union and also work outside it to help mobilize those communities that are not connected to the union, like parents and community members. I'm also working with California BATS, woohoo! I wish that the California PTA were a stronger, more reliable ally, but they are not for various reasons. I mean, I think they're okay on the charter school issue, but it's kind of like, well, where were you in 1992 when the Charter School Act was passed, right? But anyway, water under the bridge. But I think the main problem about coalitions is that people think, well, the union's got it covered, it's fine.
Yeah.
And no.
And they don't.
No. they are so depleted. I mean, the big ones in North and South, it just got done with the strikes, etc. So they're really kind of like, recovering from that. But the other thing too is that, we need some ownership.
Yeah.
Right? We need public ownership of the public schools. And by that I mean we need everybody, whether you're child free, you don't have any children, you were once a child. You are a former child if you're an adult, right? And if you're currently a child, more power to you. But we need everyone to feel a sense of ownership and, anger that these hybrid, privately managed companies are, in some cases, they're really in it for the real estate. And in the way that we learned that Fast Food Nation, it's not about burgers, it's about real estate. Same thing with charter schools. It's a real estate play. So this is about, grabbing those cute little schools in Oakland Unified that would just be so lovely as condos, right? When your charter school fails inevitably or whatever. And so we have to really look carefully at, those financial arrangements. And again, it's really complicated, but we need everyone to feel like they have a stake in keeping public spaces public, and public schools are like one of our key spaces. Yes, thanks.
What we accomplished would have been impossible without a strong coalition. We had some amazing partners whom we continue to partner with, but there are always issues, and we had some of those. There were partnerships that we expected to have that we did not have in our push for the constitutional amendment. Notably, I'll mention the League of Women Voters, which was very odd to us, and in fact they were sending folks around the state to speak against Prop 59. We were able to, what we did have was great volunteers. As I say, we're an all-volunteer organization, and we found out about these meetings and sent folks out to try and change that conversation, and they did stop telling people to vote against Prop 59. But now we're working in coalition with them both in the LA effort to ban foreign corporate money and developers, but also in Sacramento when we went up to Sacramento, the good government groups to shut down AB 84, which was Anthony Rendon's bill. Well, actually, he got Kevin Mullen to author it, but it was Anthony Rendon's bill that would have increased the max donations to the leadership PACs from 4,000 people familiar with this. Yes, thank you so much for your work on AB 84. And the League of Women Voters were awesome in that. So, you take them as friends when they will be friends, and when they won't be friends, you work around them. I hope to be working with you guys as I find out you're both in LA. And I want to talk to you about something. Your bill is on the legislative agenda for the Los Angeles County Democratic Party Legislative Committee, which I'm on. Okay. So awesome. Thank you.
So I just first want to point out the real positives of 562. While people can criticize pros and cons of the bill, it was a great organizing tool that put together really an unprecedented coalition in our state. When I first moved to California here in 2008, and got involved in single payer, if you went to a rally, you would see maybe 6 or 7 gray-haired doctors, and that was the extent of the rally. And the rallies by the end were diverse, both in terms of age, ethnicity, all walks of life, and it was really great. And as a result, if you look, polling is at an all-time high. One thing I would say is if you look at the polling of marriage equality, some of you might have worked on that. I worked on the fight for marriage equality. In the 5 years that led up to finally the ultimate passage of marriage equality, if you look at those curves and you put them, superimpose them with what the support is for single payer, the curves mirror itself. Meaning we're starting to see a sea change. And in much the same way that people came out to their families or coworkers or neighbors, people are starting to share their horror stories about why this healthcare system is not working for them. And I think it's only a matter of time. Last thing I'm just going to say about the coalition, I think of all the coalition partners that we really should all group with, it's the money in politics, because that is really at the root of all evil.
What would you say is the biggest, what the biggest impediment to your success has been in the past? And I gave some examples, not enough groups in the coalition, not enough money to get message out, not enough time to organize, picked an unstrategic bill, author did not support bill enough, too many entrenched interests working in opposition. Maybe just in summary form, what you think were the biggest impediments, everybody.
At Measure B, like I said, we lost by 12 points. Biggest impediment, likely people's understanding and knowledge of public banks. It is not a common piece of knowledge that every voter has about the purpose of banks and the purpose of banks in government, so we had very little time to prepare for that. We did have a plan to educate folks around this state bill, but our partners at City Hall jumped the gun, I think, and put it on the ballot too early. Now, not everybody in my coalition agrees with me, so I'm not speaking on their behalf, and we do have some very important allies which are necessary when you want to pass legislation in positions of power. However, they are not reliable ideological allies, and so you need to always handle your relationships with elected officials with a grain of salt and understand that they have different motivations than you, even when they say they share the same. So I would say that education and shared information is the main thing that's in the way of public banks, but then being able to have reliable elected officials in positions of power is also very important.
I would say the biggest impediments would be the complexity of these 4 bills. Trying to explain that is a big heavy lift, and that's why I created a website where I could refer people to go and sort of look at their leisure. We're basically trying to close all the loopholes that allow charters to spread without any sort of check on their proliferation. The other thing is that people like to, they like their one lovely little mom and pop charter school to be the exception to the rule. So there's a lot of resistance among progressives even, that, my little charter school can't be bad. Well, unfortunately, it's the business model. And so I think another impediment is that people have a sentimental and or naive sense of what public education is. They have warm, cozy feelings, but they aren't willing to dig down and say, hey, there's a political economy to the public administration of this public good, and that is where the charter people have seen opportunity. So I really see that as an impediment.
So Prop 59 did pass, but it passed by 54%. If we'd had $100,000 more dollars, we had $130,000 total, a statewide ballot measure in California. Our pollster, Tom Steiner, paid for a poll for us, which is a whole other story that I can tell you about another time. But what we learned there was that if we had another $100,000, we would have gone to 75%. So we would have passed with a feather. The greatest impediment, apart from money, and this really was a bigger impediment, was media. What Lauren's talking about. Why would corporate media talk about this issue when they benefit from it, and should be broken up? It should be all those same little outlets. My dad was in advertising, and I grew up knowing how many outlets you could have. Oh my goodness, that was fast. Okay, so.
So I think the biggest obstacle is still an uninformed electorate. So for those of you that know about single payer, please spread the gospel to anyone who listened. And I think so that's the first thing. And then in the end, we don't have a Republican problem here in California with a corporate Democrat.
Right. Exactly.
You know, there is a mod caucus in Sacramento, and they get press, and they talk about how they're going to keep, but there is no progressive caucus in Sacramento. Can you believe that? Despite the fact that we're supposed to be in this progressive legislature, there is no progressive caucus.
That's because they have no progressives.
So I think that, well, but I think that says a lot about why organizations and get-togethers like this are so important to keep this message. Thank you.
The first part of this question is easy. Do you see the value in forming a coalition of coalitions, such as the California Progressive Alliance, and becoming a bigger progressive force to deal with our mutual opponents, the established moneyed interests? And, this is the putting on the spot part, would you be willing to devote time to the following things? Contacting your members about issues unrelated to your main purpose, jumping on a monthly conference call with other issue campaign leaders, advocating for legislation unrelated to your main purpose when you are doing voter outreach, either via phone banking or door-to-door canvassing. And what other ideas do you have for how the CPA can be most effective?
All right, I'll start with the hard part first. I do think that coalitions like this are really important. I think that this is how political parties start, and I think that in the end, you either need to take over one of the two major political parties or create a new one with a line that all of us can agree on. It's democratically chosen and not influenced by outside corporate interests. Yes, I'm more than willing to get on to represent California Public Banking Alliance around public banking and to coordinate with other issue candidates. When we were going through Measure B, we were pushing real hard for housing initiatives that were on the ballot at that time because they aligned perfectly with what we're doing. It's easy for me to say yes because public banking integrates very well with everything else. It's a lot harder if you're trying to convince people about the Clean Air Act or something to also bring up single payer because you also need to have focus in your conversations. It's not always possible, but we do have to make an effort to reach out. I think that groups like mine need to do a much better job of reaching out to communities for urban development, for racial justice. You know, there's a lack of queer activists here, as far as I can tell. So, like, so I think that's another element. Is we can't be satisfied by just calling ourselves progressive and seeing who shows up. We have to actually go out and make space. That's an active activity. And then, what was about CPA? I think that's it. We're good. Thanks.
I am all for CPA. The California Democratic Party does not have an education caucus. I think people think like, well, they
have a children's caucus that's pretended to be about children.
Again, people think like, oh, well, the union's got it, it's all handled. Well, I think there needs to be a space of people who are in favor of unions, pro-labor, but at the same time have another power base, right? Community people, people without children have a stake in like not being ruled by stupid people.
It's a very specific question. Are you willing to?
Yeah, totally. And I also expect, the big thing I would say is I expect reciprocity, right? So like I'm out there on your issue, you better be there on my issue. So like, I want to see 300 signatures from this conference on reformcharterschools.org. Because I think that is like the minimal lift that you can do, okay?
Thank you.
So MOVI does work on other issues, largely because money in politics touches every issue. So we're very open to that. To David's point, I think when you're doing outreach to voters, you should talk about one thing because you confuse people. But apart from that, yes, but you would create other phone banks to do that. And I just can't reemphasize enough Paul's point about what has happened in Sacramento as far as the absence of progressive champions. And I think that may be a result of the jungle primary, and I think that was Charlie Munger's idea, was to move the progressives out of the way and get the moderates up into the Capitol. And I was speaking with Holly from San Francisco at lunch, who told me that in San Francisco they have ranked choice voting. So I think that might be something that this coalition might start with. To do statewide, because that would transform it, in my opinion, almost instantly.
I think absolutely. When I was at the Courage Campaign, we tried to do this within the first month of taking over. Governor Brown tried to do a prison expansion, and it brought an unprecedented coalition together of people that normally didn't work with one another, because they realized that $700 million went to prison expansion. That was money that was going to go away from early childhood education or healthcare or other things. So I do think that none of us here are single issue voters. I think we're all progressives and we care about a lot of different things. Bill Hyman, Dr. Bill, are you around here? He's right in the back. He's a physician that does a lot, but also with PDA does a tremendous amount of work on other progressive issues. And I think that one of the things we're trying to do among the physician community is to get more white coats at non-medical events for social justice. And I think that's what we all really need to work together.
All right, my name is Joe. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, Native American Veterans Association. I'm a proud member of the Yaqui Nation. For all of you that don't understand that, look it up, Google it. I heard a lot of words today, and I was initially unable to speak English when I started in the Los Angeles Unified School District sometime back in the 40s. So there was no bilingual education program then. My sainted Yaqui mother told me, get a dictionary and start parsing the words. I've heard a lot of words here, coalition building, consensus, all this stuff. The one that I particularly sticks in my craw is politics. When I looked it up in the dictionary, I found it was based on two words. Poly, Greek, meaning many, and ticks are blood-sucking parasites, all right?
Hi, my name is Roxanne, and I'm the first transgender woman to get a vote in the Democratic Party, so I want to say thank you to the good doctor. I'm bringing that up because I think that should be an embarrassment to the Democratic Party that not one of us is employed in Sacramento, not one of us has a vote, and they stripped my state vote, and I'm fighting to get it back. But Medicare for All is also important for our community because we have no coverage, no health at all, and Medicare for All is the only way we're going to get it. So thank you, doctor, for your good work.
Do we have any sway with Governor Newsom as far as like 7? Because okay, so did they expand it? Okay. And
so Governor Newsom has been very open and willing to listen to the single payer community. Roseanne DeMauro, who was the former head of the nurses union, has been talking to him regularly about single payer and sort of expectations to put people on the council. So I do think a lot will be telling by who he appoints, obviously. But until that happens, we do believe there will be quite a few pro-single payer people on that commission.
coalitioning, you have postal workers and letter carriers, and you guys been working with those unions for public banking, for postal banking?
Yes. The Postal Workers Union has been vocal in their support of expanding postal services to include short-term credit and checking services at their locations. Yes, it's huge. They have a huge amount of real estate in every single zip code, and postal banking is a huge part of what we think a federal public banking solution will include. Obviously, it's not a state issue, so it's not a part of what we're doing. But all of our work would create banks that would easily integrate with those kinds of postal banks. Obviously, the Postal Workers Union has a very special place in our Constitution, and like the post office does in general. So they're not they're not on the ground with us here in California organizing. But we think that a Bernie Sanders candidacy can really drive that conversation.
Have you used adversarial politics such as Cynthia Nixon versus Andrew Cuomo? And would you continue to use that as well?
Well, we have a really great enemy in our movement, and it's Wall Street. And we get to just mention them constantly, and we basically use them as our main foil all the time. Nobody likes Wall Street except for California bankers. So.
I mean, basically threatening elected officials' seats, like Cynthia Nixon threatened Andrew Cuomo's governor seat, and so he moved left on a lot of issues.
Well, you know, we did that. Let me speak to Elizabeth Warren, who we call California's own Elizabeth Warren. She was running for state assembly down in San Diego's District 76. And she was an activist with Move On. I met her on the TPP coalition calls back in 2012. And she ran against a woman by the name of Tasha Berner Horvath, who was an establishment Democrat. She was on the Encinitas City Council. Perfectly nice woman, but it was clear that she was going to go along with Anthony Rendon's agenda. And they ran hit pieces against Elizabeth Warren, an independent expenditure committee encouraged by the establishment Democrats in San Diego, funded by the SEIU, and Planned Parenthood had a hand in that. Basically 5 hit pieces against Elizabeth Warren. So we have tried to run progressive activists against establishment Democrats. Maria Estrada is right there behind you. And the problem is we have problems within our own ranks, and I will say establishment unions and establishment NGOs. So that's the problem with trying to do that. We've tried.
Yes. I would like to make it a litmus test that what kind of Democrat are you if you're taking money from the charter, California Charter Schools Association? Why are you aligned with Betsy DeVos? That is essentially her, agenda, right, is to privatize schools and basically diminish, if not eliminate, the public school system. So I think it's time. I think it's time to bring it to the party. I think it's time to bring it everywhere we go. And where it really matters is in the endorsements, and that's why I'm kind of pushing the ADEM issue, because if Tony Thurmond had not had the California Democratic Party endorsement, if Marshall Tuck, the corporate Dem, had it, we might have Marshall Tuck as the state superintendent of public instruction. So I'm ready to make it a litmus test.
Yeah.
And Marshall Tuck was literally laughed off the stage at the convention when he was seeking the endorsement of the party. I just want to highlight to everyone what Speaker Pelosi did this week, which was to try to require a pledge that anybody who was working with anybody who was going to primary a Democrat was going to be blacklisted, and their campaign consultancy services would no longer be accepted by the Democratic Party. So that's a giant problem. And I'll just leave that where it is.
This is a statement in regards to what we're doing as progressives. I think there's a disconnect in communities like mine. There are no Our Revolutions and no clubs or groups or anything like that. I'm actually going to do a quarterly newsletter in my district and the surrounding all Southeast LA to bring attention to certain issues that affect us. But like this whole convention, it would have been really good if we had someone who could translate in Spanish and it was live streamed so that people could see it. Latinos are the biggest voting bloc in the state, and I think we're missing that. People didn't know about SB 562 because we don't go in those communities. Like Lauren said, progressives are in silos and they're in bubbles. And because we all talk and we all know who Kevin De Leon is and we all know who this person is, they have no idea. People are just working, trying to get by and pay their bills and take care of their kids. So we need to be able to make that connection in communities like mine. And it has to be where we have Spanish-speaking people that are on the ground with every issue that you guys brought up. We need your help. I need your help to get that information to my community so that they can come out in numbers for you.
I think that we need to rethink the way we talk about corporate power. It is not really corporate free elections. It's not money out of politics. We are in an age where there is a hostile corporate takeover of every single American political institution. And you want to talk about a litmus test? How about the taking over of criminal justice? Anybody who takes money from private prisons. We need to rethink that, and the San Diego Progressive Alliance is just starting on a project. It's going to be a pamphlet, maybe like Thomas Paine. Yeah, great ideas, right? But it's going to be a pamphlet to widen the way we talk about corporate rule, way beyond corporate money or getting money out of politics. We're talking about corporate control and decorporatizing our democracy.
Can you please remind everybody that tens of thousands of people are dying every year because Medicare for All has not been passed, and so we need to make this go as fast as possible. The curves look good, but we've got to light it on fire. Michele, thank you so much for what you are doing. Money is not speech, corporations are not people, and the Bill of Rights was written for people. So as we get this United overturned, can you continue to work for clean money, full public campaign financing, and addressing the issue of 5 Supreme Court justices who pretend they believe that the Bill of Rights was written for corporations. Impeachment should be on the table for Supreme Court justices. Thank you.
So I appreciated what Matt Gonzalez said earlier on about needing to work on those really foundational issues that really are barriers to all the different kinds of issues that we're talking about. And you've also started to address that, talking about ranked choice voting, getting money out of politics. But one of those foundational issues that I don't see people talking about, or actually that's my question, is anybody working on this, is overturning the voter-led initiative that created the open primary, but at the same time only puts forward the top 2 vote getters, so that after the primary there are no Greens, there are no peace and freedom candidates to drive those discussions and push the Democrats further to the left.
Hi, my name is Rosie Cepeda, and I ran for city council in San Jose, and I didn't win because I'm not a millionaire. But here's what I want to pose to everyone in this room, including the panel, because it's been brought up over and over again. It's money in politics. So this is what I would like everyone who has a network, and the panelists who you're in a position already of driving the train, is I think we need to shame politicians, and they will come out of this website to show who are the main corporate sponsors, and we drive that message over and over and over again until we turn the tide that there's no PAC money and there's no corporate money.
Thank you. My name is Melissa Michelson. I'm really impressed with the panel. Thank you so much. You guys are top notch. I want to ask a quick question. How many people here are desperately looking for something to get involved in right now? Okay, so very few. My point being that I feel like we're running. No, not just preaching to the choir, but we need to grow our movement. Like this is the hub right here, and if we can get more people involved with us, I feel like we are all grasping and trying to do everything at once. And so asking each other to get involved in each other's thing, I think we need to look outside of that and get more. Thank you.
Hi, this is to Michelle, but to everybody. It was proposed earlier that there be a litmus test, prison money, and charter school money. How about just saying, I'm not going to accept corporate donations, period.
Hi, Mike Feinstein, former Green Mayor in Santa Monica. Thank you. And my question is, in addition to trying to get money out of politics and advancing things with ranked choice voting, do you see a role for actually using proportional representation elections to have a full multi-party democracy, and should that be part of the Progressive Alliance approach? Thank you.
I have a question about whether it would be possible to have a package of propositions, state propositions that cover many of your issues, because I was trying to lobby my local assembly member, Robert Rivas, to support public banking. He thinks it's going to die. So the thing I feel is happening, I support Medicare for all, and I feel like my question is, do you think we could actually move beyond the politicians, even though we'll work with them and try to get them to do this, but maybe work together as a coalition to support each other to do a package of initiatives in, say, 2022?
Yeah, so as to Assemblymember Rivas' point of view that our bill will die, it is not going to be easy to pass a bill that allows cities to open public banks. And that prediction may or may not be true, but it does not mean that we would stop our effort. I do see our bill as being potentially a part of a California Green New Deal. I think portfolios might be a way to get initiatives through, especially in election years when you can turn into a litmus test. But I also think that you're correct that if we wait until next year, all of our issues will fall to the wayside, and suddenly it will just be a Democrat versus Republican question, and all of us will be called traitors to our nation for asking about the specifics. So I think this is the year to establish AB 857 as a potential victory, and if we have to push it for another year, get it into a budget, we will. But I do think that urgency is pretty important, and so I would encourage you to contact your assembly member and tell them that they're wrong and that we will pass it.
Reformcharterschools.org. Yeah, thank you. We're working on being trilingual, so we have a Spanish language petition that we're about to update. We have Mandarin Chinese in simplified and traditional, obviously English, and I think we're going to try to add a few more languages, but I am deeply committed to like multilingual, multicultural kind of organizing for sure. And then with regard to propositions, I think there are some risks and maybe we need to think about the strategy of that, but I did want to add, I am totally down with Prop 13 reform, and that is on the ballot. But I do not want to go into that and flood the system, the public education system, with money and still have charters there to gobble it up, okay? And the other thing is the equity piece. What is the point of flooding the system with money if you are buying more school resource officers, police on campus, when kids are saying, we need to stop the school push out, we need to stop the, kind of little mini mass incarceration thing that's going on in the schools, okay? So there's always the equity piece in addition to the full refunding.
Start with the Supreme Court and say that in our view, there are 4 illegitimate members of that court. So, that's the George Bush never won an election, and the Supreme Court said they weren't interested in counting votes, right, of an election, and that's how we got George Bush. So that, to me, was our original PTSD moment. So that is something that we are hoping ultimately to address. As far as public financing, our position right now is we're working in Los Angeles to increase the matching funds for public financing and lower the contribution limits. So we think that's going to happen this year. You may know that SB 1107, which passed the legislature a couple of seasons ago, which would have now made it so that it was no longer illegal to have public financing in California. So that's a stumbling block a lot of people don't know we have. It did pass the legislature, but it's failing in the courts. And so that remains. But my personal feeling about this is, while I love it on local levels, because I think it can have a huge impact, statewide or nationwide, at this point, as long as super PACs still exist, it's just going to be another way that public money is going to be used under this guise that we have public financing, when in fact it's going to be the private money that will still control what happens and what our policies are. So not quite yet, statewide or nationally, but absolutely let's work on it at the local level. Thank you.
Real quickly, with regard to some sort of initiative for single payer, I think, again, we have to do a better job of really educating our electorate before we do that, because when we even had insurance rate regulation, the insurance industry outspent us $50 million to $1 million, and it got resoundingly defeated. You can imagine how much money they have from all the denials they've done for our healthcare and jacking up our pharmaceutical costs. They have stockpiles of money to just spread lie after lie after lie. So if we don't do a good job of really educating our friends and neighbors and coworkers, we're not going to stand a chance on any type of initiative.